The flames licked the night sky, sending embers swirling like fireflies against the darkness as Olivia Anderson's screams pierced the chaos. Her home, a modest cabin on the outskirts of Tonopah Junction, Nevada, was engulfed in fire. The roof already partially collapsed, but her baby daughter remained inside. Clutching her singed nightgown around her body, Olivia fought against the restraining arms of neighbors while the crackling inferno consumed everything she held dear. "My baby," she shrieked, her voice raw with desperation. "Someone please save my Lily." It was 1878, and in the unforgiving landscape of Nevada's mining territory, tragedy was as common as the sagebrush that dotted the hills. Olivia had lost her husband to a mining accident just 6 months earlier, leaving her alone with their infant daughter. Now, as she watched flames devour the home they'd built together, she felt her world crumbling completely. Through the haze of smoke and the crowd of onlookers, a figure on horseback appeared, silhouetted against the burning structure. The man dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jingling as his boots hit the hard, packed dirt. Samuel Hayes, a cattle driver passing through Tonopah Junction on his way north to Idaho territory, assessed the situation with experienced eyes. "Whose house?" he demanded, his voice carrying over the commotion. "Mine," Olivia cried, lunging forward. "My baby's still inside her cradle. Please help her." Without hesitation, Samuel tied a bandana around his face and moved toward the burning cabin. "You're mad, mister," shouted one of the townsmen. "That roof's about to come down." Samuel glanced back at Olivia, her face streaked with tears and soot, her eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "Where's the baby's room?" he called. "Back corner, left side," she responded, hope flaring in her chest for the first time since the fire had started. With a curt nod, Samuel disappeared into the burning structure, the crowd collectively holding their breath. The minutes that followed stretched like an eternity for Olivia, who had dropped to her knees in prayer, her fingers interlaced so tightly her knuckles turned white. When a section of the roof collapsed with a deafening crash, a wail escaped her lips. But then, through the smoke and flames, a figure emerged, Samuel, hunched over, cradling a small bundle against his chest. Olivia surged forward, but another section of the roof threatened to collapse. Samuel quickened his pace, dodging falling debris. As he reached the doorway, a burning beam crashed down behind him, sending a shower of sparks into the night. "Baby first, then you," he rasped through his bandana, handing the wailing infant to Olivia. "Give her here, madam." With trembling hands, Olivia took her daughter, tears of relief streaming down her face as she checked the baby for injuries. Lily was red-faced and crying, but miraculously unharmed. Samuel collapsed beside them, coughing violently as he tore the bandana from his face. "Thank you," Olivia whispered, clutching her child close. "Thank you." Samuel's only response was a nod as he struggled to catch his breath. The town doctor rushed forward to examine both the baby and her rescuer, declaring both would survive the ordeal. As the townspeople finally managed to organize a bucket brigade to prevent the fire from spreading to nearby structures, Olivia sat in stunned silence, the reality of her situation sinking in. Her home was gone. Everything she owned, everything she and her late husband had built together, reduced to ashes in a matter of hours. And yet, looking down at her daughter's face, pink and perfect despite the chaos around them, Olivia knew she had not lost everything. "You'll stay with us tonight," said Martha Johnson, the wife of the local storekeeper, wrapping a blanket around Olivia's shoulders. "We've got room." Olivia nodded mutely, rising to her feet on unsteady legs. She turned to thank Samuel again, but the cowboy had already moved away to help the bucket line, his tall figure silhouetted against the dying fire. "Who is he?" she asked Martha, her eyes following his movements. "Don't rightly know," Martha replied. "Just some cowboy passing through, I reckon. Came into the store yesterday for supplies. Said he was heading to Idaho with a cattle drive." Olivia watched as Samuel worked alongside the townsman, his movements efficient despite his earlier ordeal. She clutched Lily closer to her chest, knowing she owed this stranger everything. Dawn broke over Tanapa Junction, revealing the full extent of the devastation. Olivia's cabin was now nothing more than a blackened skeleton, wisps of smoke still rising from the ashes. She stood at a distance, Lily asleep in her arms as the first rays of sunlight illuminated what remained of her life. "It started in the kitchen," said Sheriff Wilson, approaching her with hat in hand. "Looks like maybe a stove fire that got out of control." Olivia nodded numbly. She'd been so exhausted last night she might have been careless with the stove before collapsing into bed. The guilt weighed on her as heavily as the grief. "What will you do now, Mrs. Anderson?" the sheriff asked gently. Before she could answer, a deep voice spoke from behind them. "Madam, if I may." Olivia turned to find Samuel Hayes standing there, his clothes still smelling of smoke, his face smudged with soot. In the morning light, she could see him clearly for the first time, tall and broad-shouldered, with eyes the color of a summer storm and a jawline shadowed with stubble. He couldn't have been more than 30, but there was something in those eyes that spoke of a man who'd seen more than his share of hardship. "Mr. Hayes," she acknowledged, gratitude warming her voice. "I can never repay you for what you did last night." Samuel shook his head dismissively. "Any man would have done the same." He cleared his throat. "I've been talking with some of the townfolk. They're organizing to help rebuild your home, but it'll take time. In the meantime, Mrs. Johnson says you can stay with her, but—" He hesitated, shifting his weight. "I've got a proposition if you're willing to hear it." Olivia tilted her head curiously. "I'm listening. I'm headed north with a herd of cattle. Boss man's setting up a new ranch outside of Boise. He's looking for a cook for the outfit, good pay, and you'd have your own quarters. Safe place for the little one, too." Samuel glanced at the sleeping baby. "It's not charity, madam. We need someone who can cook, and from what Mrs. Johnson tells me, you're the best baker in the territory." Sheriff Wilson frowned. "A cattle drive is no place for a woman and child, Hayes." "With respect, Sheriff, it's not a typical drive. The boss's wife and children are traveling with us. There are 3 wagons of supplies and personal effects. Mrs. Anderson and her daughter would ride in one of them, not on horseback." Olivia's mind raced. The proposition was unexpected but not unwelcome. She had no family in Tanapa Junction. She'd come west with her husband from Pennsylvania 3 years ago, leaving behind everything familiar. The friends she'd made were kind, but they had their own struggles, their own families to feed. "When do you leave?" she asked, surprising herself with the question. Samuel's eyes widened slightly as if he hadn't expected her to consider the offer. "Day after tomorrow. That would give you time to gather whatever you need." Olivia looked down at her sleeping daughter, then at the charred remains of her home. There was nothing left to gather. Nothing left to keep her in Tanapa Junction but memories of a husband now gone and dreams that had turned to ash. "I'll do it," she said firmly, meeting Samuel's gaze. "On one condition." "Name it. Teach me to shoot. If I'm heading into unknown territory with my child, I need to be able to protect her." A ghost of a smile touched Samuel's lips. "Yes, madam, I reckon that can be arranged." Sheriff Wilson looked between them, concern etched on his weathered face. "You sure about this, Olivia? It's a dangerous journey." Olivia thought of the night before, how quickly security could be ripped away, how fragile life truly was. "I'm sure, Sheriff." Sometimes the most dangerous thing is standing still. The next day was a flurry of activity. The women of Tanapa Junction rallied around Olivia, donating clothes for her and Lily, cooking utensils, and other essentials. Martha Johnson insisted on giving her a sturdy wooden cradle for Lily. "It carried all 4 of my babies," she said, patting the smooth wood. "Now it'll keep your little one safe on the journey." In the afternoon, as promised, Samuel took Olivia to a clearing outside town. He carried a Winchester rifle and a Colt revolver. "Have you ever fired a gun before?" he asked, loading the revolver with practiced ease. Olivia shook her head. "My husband didn't believe women should handle firearms." Something flickered across Samuel's face, disapproval, perhaps, but he said nothing as he handed her the revolver. "It's heavier than I expected," she remarked, adjusting her grip. "That'll help with the recoil," he replied. "Now, stand with your feet shoulder-width apart. Hold the gun with both hands." For the next hour, Samuel patiently instructed her on proper shooting stance, how to aim, and how to control her breathing. When it came time for her to actually fire the weapon, Olivia was trembling with nervousness. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Good," said Samuel. "Fear keeps you cautious. Caution keeps you alive, but don't let it paralyze you." Olivia took a deep breath, aimed at the bottle Samuel had placed on a stump, and squeezed the trigger. The explosion was deafening, the recoil jarring her arms, but the bottle remained intact. "I missed," she said, disappointment heavy in her voice. "You'll miss 100 times before you hit once," Samuel replied calmly, "and that's all right, just keep trying." By the end of the session, Olivia had managed to hit the target twice. Her arms ached, her ears rang, but there was a newfound confidence in her stance as she handed the revolver back to Samuel. "You're a natural," he said, and something in his tone made her cheeks flush. "Thank you for this," she said seriously. "For all of it." Not many men would bother teaching a woman to shoot, let alone rescue her child from a burning building. Samuel's eyes met hers, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them. Then he looked away, busying himself with cleaning the gun. "We leave at first light tomorrow," he said. "Best get some rest." That night, as Olivia lay in the Johnsons' spare room with Lily sleeping soundly in her borrowed cradle, she stared at the ceiling and wondered if she was making the right decision. She knew nothing about this man beyond his courage and his kindness. She knew nothing about the family that would employ her or the wilderness they would traverse. But as she turned to look at her daughter's peaceful face, Olivia knew one thing for certain: there was nothing left for them in Tonopah Junction but ashes. Perhaps this journey north was not just an escape, but a beginning. Dawn had barely broken when the wagon train assembled at the edge of town. 3 large Conestoga wagons were loaded with supplies, furniture, and personal belongings. A herd of about 200 cattle milled around under the watchful eyes of half a dozen cowboys. Samuel stood talking with a well-dressed man who Olivia assumed must be the ranch owner. Martha Johnson helped Olivia secure Lily's cradle in the second wagon, where she would ride with the ranch owner's wife and children. "You write to us when you get settled," Martha insisted, embracing Olivia tightly, "and you come back to visit when you can." Olivia nodded, though they both knew the likelihood of her return was slim. The West was vast, and distances that might be crossed in a day by modern standards could take weeks of hard travel. As she climbed into the wagon, Samuel approached, leading his horse. "Mrs. Anderson," he greeted her formally. "This is Mr. Edwards, our employer." He gestured to the well-dressed man who had followed him. Richard Edwards extended his hand to Olivia. "Mrs. Anderson, Hayes here tells me you're quite the cook. We're pleased to have you join us." "Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Edwards," Olivia replied, shaking his hand. "I promise you won't regret it." Edwards smiled warmly. "My wife Victoria is looking forward to having another woman along for the journey. Too much male company can be rather tiresome." He winked good-naturedly. Samuel cleared his throat. "We should get moving if we want to make good time today." Edwards nodded and moved to mount his horse. Samuel lingered a moment longer, his eyes on Olivia. "You still sure about this?" he asked quietly. Olivia glanced back at the town where she'd known both joy and heartbreak. "I'm sure," she said firmly. "What about you? Regretting your offer already?" A rare smile crossed his face, transforming his rugged features. "Not at all, madam, not at all." With that, he mounted his horse and rode to the front of the procession. A moment later, a shout went up, and the wagon train began to move. Victoria Edwards proved to be a pleasant traveling companion. In her mid-30s, she was a cultured woman who had grown up in Boston before marrying Richard and moving west. Their 2 children, Emma, age 10, and James, age 8, were well-behaved and quickly became enamored with baby Lily. "May I hold her?" Emma asked on their second day of travel, her eyes wide with excitement. Of course, Olivia replied, carefully transferring Lily to the girl's waiting arms. Support her head just like that. Perfect. Victoria watched with a smile. Emma's always wanted a little sister. James was quite enough for me, though. She laughed softly. As the wagon rumbled along, Olivia found herself sharing her story with Victoria, her journey west with her husband Thomas, his work in the silver mines, his untimely death, and finally, the fire that had taken everything else. How dreadful, Victoria said sympathetically. And this Mr. Hayes just happened to be passing through, like something out of a dime novel, Olivia agreed. I still can't believe he risked his life for a stranger's child. Victoria's eyes twinkled knowingly. Hayes is an interesting man. Richard hired him 2 years ago when we were still in Texas. He doesn't say much about his past, but he's the best foreman Richard has ever had. Honest, hardworking, and the men respect him. Olivia found her gaze drifting to where Samuel rode alongside the cattle herd, his tall figure straight in the saddle, his attention constantly scanning their surroundings. He seems capable, Victoria laughed. That's one word for it, and not unattractive for a cowboy. Olivia felt heat rising to her cheeks. I hardly noticed, she lied. Of course not, Victoria replied, clearly not believing her. You're still in mourning for your husband, that's entirely proper. But as the days passed and the wagon train made its slow progress northward, Olivia found herself increasingly aware of Samuel Hayes. He kept his distance most of the time, busy with his duties overseeing the herd and the other cowboys. But each evening when they made camp, he would check in on her and Lily, ensuring they had everything they needed. The nights are getting colder, he said on their 5th evening, approaching the campfire where Olivia sat with Lily. Here, he handed her an extra blanket, for the little one. Thank you, Olivia said, taking the blanket. Their fingers brushed briefly, and she couldn't help but notice how rough his hands were compared to her own. Working hands, honest hands. Samuel nodded and turned to leave, but Olivia called after him. Won't you sit for a while? You've hardly rested since we left Tonopah Junction. He hesitated, glancing toward where the other cowboys had gathered around their own fire. I should check the perimeter again. The perimeter can wait 10 minutes, she insisted. You need to eat something properly. Here. She held out a bowl of the stew she'd prepared for the camp. After a moment's hesitation, Samuel sat on a log across from her and accepted the bowl. Thank you, Mrs. Anderson. Please call me Olivia. After all, you did save my daughter's life. I think that earns you the right to use my given name. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Olivia, then, and I'm Samuel. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the occasional lowing of cattle in the distance. Lily slept peacefully in her cradle beside Olivia, her tiny face illuminated by the firelight. She looks like you, Samuel observed, nodding toward the baby. Olivia smiled. Everyone says she has her father's eyes, though. Were you married long? 3 years. We came west together from Pennsylvania. Thomas had dreams of striking it rich in the silver mines. Her smile turned sad. He never did find that silver vein he was looking for. Samuel nodded thoughtfully. The West has a way of breaking dreams as often as it fulfills them. What about you? Olivia asked. What brought you out here? He was quiet for so long that Olivia thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, War. After Appomattox, there wasn't much left for me back east. You fought for the Union? Yes, madam, joined up in '63 when I was 18. Saw things no man should have to see. He stared into the fire, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. Afterward, I just kept moving west, seemed like the right direction. Olivia studied him in the firelight, seeing the shadows that crossed his face as he spoke of the war. She'd heard similar stories from other veterans who'd come west seeking a fresh start. The war had ended 13 years ago, but for men like Samuel, the memories were still fresh. And now, she asked gently, is this the right direction for you, Idaho? Samuel seemed to come back from whatever dark place his mind had wandered to. He looked up at her, his expression softening. I believe it might be. The Edwards are good people, the land is promising. And, he trailed off, his eyes meeting hers across the fire, and, she prompted. And the company's not bad either, he finished, a hint of teasing in his tone. Olivia felt her cheeks warm, and she was grateful for the dim light that concealed her blush. Well, I'm glad we're not a burden on the journey. Never that, he said seriously. Having you and Lily along. It's reminded the men what we're working toward. A home, a future, not just another payday. The sincerity in his voice touched something in Olivia, a part of her heart she'd thought had died with Thomas. Before she could respond, however, Richard Edwards approached their fire. Hayes, we've got a situation with the horses. Thompson thinks he saw something moving around the remuda. Samuel was on his feet instantly, all traces of relaxation gone. Wolves or two-legged predators, can't say for certain, but I'd bet on the latter. Probably just looking to steal a horse or two, Samuel nodded grimly. I'll handle it. He glanced back at Olivia. Get inside the wagon and stay there until morning. Take your revolver. The commanding tone in his voice brooked no argument. Olivia quickly gathered Lily and her cradle, retreating to the safety of the wagon as Samuel and Richard moved toward the horse corral. Sleep eluded her that night as she lay awake, listening for any sounds of trouble. She heard muted voices at one point, then the thunder of hoofbeats receding into the distance. It wasn't until dawn that Samuel appeared at the wagon to inform them that 2 horse thieves had been caught trying to steal from their remuda. We persuaded them to seek opportunities elsewhere, he said, his expression revealing nothing about what that persuasion might have entailed. No one was hurt, Olivia asked, scanning him for signs of injury. No, madam, just a bit of excitement to break the monotony. There was a weariness in his eyes that suggested he hadn't slept at all. We'll be moving out in an hour. As he turned to leave, Olivia called after him. Samuel, he paused, looking back at her, thank you for keeping us safe. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or something deeper. Always, he replied simply and walked away. The journey continued, the wagon train making slow but steady progress through Nevada's harsh landscape. Days blurred into weeks as they followed the trail northward, crossing into Idaho territory as summer gave way to early autumn. The cattle grew restless as they sensed the changing season, and the cowboys worked tirelessly to keep the herd together. Olivia settled into a routine of cooking for the outfit, caring for Lily, and learning more about the life that awaited them at the Edwards' new ranch. Victoria spoke excitedly about the house her husband had commissioned, with separate quarters for Olivia and Lily adjacent to the main structure. You'll have privacy but still be close enough if you need anything, Victoria explained. And once the ranch is established, Richard plans to help build you a place of your own if you wish. The generosity overwhelmed Olivia. That's more than I could have hoped for. Victoria patted her hand. Your family now, dear. We take care of our own. Family. The word resonated with Olivia, who had felt adrift since Thomas's death. The Edwards were offering her more than employment, they were offering belonging. And then there was Samuel. Their interactions remained brief, but increasingly familiar as the journey progressed. He would seek her out each evening, ostensibly to check on her welfare, but their conversations grew longer, more personal. She learned about his childhood in Ohio, his difficult relationship with his father, his dreams of someday having his own ranch. In turn, she told him about her life before coming west, her childhood in Pennsylvania, her love of books, her hope that Lily would grow up with more opportunities than she'd had. One evening, as they sat by the fire after the others had retired, Samuel surprised her with a gift, a small leather-bound journal. I noticed you like to write, he said, somewhat awkwardly. Thought you might want somewhere to put your thoughts. Olivia ran her fingers over the smooth leather, deeply touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. Where did you get this? Trading post we passed a few days back. It's not fancy, but it's perfect, she interrupted, meeting his gaze with genuine gratitude. Thank you, Samuel. He nodded, seemingly pleased by her reaction. What do you write about? Olivia clutched the journal to her chest. Everything. Memories of Thomas, hopes for Lily's future, observations about the journey. She hesitated, then added softly, lately, I've been writing about new beginnings. Samuel's eyes held hers across the fire. New beginnings, he echoed. I like the sound of that. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities, until Lily's cry broke the silence. Olivia rose to tend to her daughter, and Samuel stood as well. I should let you rest, he said. We've got a challenging stretch ahead tomorrow. As he walked away, Olivia found herself watching his retreating figure, a fluttering sensation in her chest that both excited and frightened her. It had been less than a year since Thomas's death. Was it too soon to feel this way about another man? Was it disloyal to the memory of her husband? That night, she wrote in her new journal by the light of a small lantern, pouring out her conflicted feelings. She wrote of guilt and grief, of unexpected connection and the stirring of hope. And as she wrote, a clarity began to emerge. Thomas would not have wanted her to mourn forever. He would have wanted her to find happiness again, especially if it meant security for their daughter. The next morning dawned clear and cold, with frost coating the grass around their campsite. Richard announced that they were entering the final stretch of their journey, just 3 more days, until they reached the land he had purchased in the Boys Valley. The ranch sits along the Boys River, he explained to the assembled group. Fertile land, good grazing for the cattle, and close enough to the city for commerce but far enough for privacy. The news energized everyone, even the normally stoic cowboys. The cattle seemed to sense the change as well, moving with more purpose as the wagon train set off. By midday, however, the weather had taken a turn for the worse. Dark clouds rolled in from the west, and a biting wind whipped across the plains. Storm's coming, Samuel said, riding up alongside the wagon where Olivia sat with Victoria and the children. A bad one from the look of it. Richard rode up behind him, his expression grim. We need to find shelter. There's a canyon about 3 miles ahead. We can hole up there until it passes. The wagon train increased its pace, racing against the approaching storm. Olivia held Lily close, concern growing as the baby fussed in response to the jostling wagon and howling wind. It'll be all right, Victoria reassured her, though her own face betrayed her worry. Richard and Samuel know what they're doing. They reached the canyon just as the first raindrops began to fall, fat, cold drops that quickly turned into a downpour. The wagons were positioned in a protective semicircle, with the cattle herded into the most sheltered part of the canyon. Tarpaulins were stretched between the wagons to create makeshift shelters as the storm unleashed its fury. Thunder crashed overhead, and lightning split the darkened sky. The cattle grew increasingly agitated, and Samuel organized the cowboys into shifts to keep them from stampeding. Rain drummed relentlessly on the canvas cover of the wagon where Olivia huddled with Lily, Victoria, and the children. I don't like this, Victoria murmured, peering out at the deluge. Richard should be back by now. As if summoned by her concern, the wagon flap opened and Richard ducked inside, water streaming from his oilskin coat. Everyone all right in here? Victoria embraced her husband, relief evident in her face. We're fine. The children are scared, but they're being very brave. Richard smiled at his son and daughter. That's my little pioneers. He turned to Olivia. How's Lily holding up? She's finally asleep, Olivia replied, glancing down at the bundled infant in her arms. Where's Samuel? Still with the herd. The canyon's starting to flood. We need to move the cattle to higher ground. He kissed Victoria quickly. I have to get back out there. Stay in the wagon, all of you. As Richard disappeared back into the storm, Victoria's face creased with worry. I've never seen a storm this bad since we left Texas. Olivia stared at the wagon flap, concern for Samuel gnawing at her. She pictured him out in the deluge, working to save the herd while the rest of them sheltered in relative safety. The thought of him in danger made her heart clench painfully. Hours passed, the storm showing no signs of abating. The children eventually fell asleep, but Olivia and Victoria remained awake, listening to the fury of the elements outside. Occasionally, they could hear shouted commands or the lowing of frightened cattle over the storm's roar. It was well past midnight when the wagon flap opened again, revealing Samuel. He was drenched to the bone, mud caking his clothing, exhaustion etched in every line of his face. "Samuel," Olivia exclaimed, instinctively rising to meet him. "Are you all right?" He nodded wearily. "The herd's secure for now. We lost a few head to the flood, but most made it to higher ground." His eyes found Victoria. "Richard's with the men. He sent me to check on you all." Victoria touched his arm gratefully. "Thank you. You look half drowned. You should get some rest." Samuel shook his head. "Can't. Too much to do still." He turned to go but swayed slightly, catching himself on the wagon frame. Olivia was at his side instantly. "You're exhausted. At least sit for a moment." "I'm fine," he insisted, but allowed her to guide him to a seat on one of the trunks. Olivia retrieved a blanket and wrapped it around his shoulders, then poured him a cup of coffee from the pot they'd kept warm on a small spirit stove. "Drink this. It'll warm you up." Samuel accepted the cup gratefully, his hands trembling slightly from cold and fatigue. As he sipped the hot liquid, color gradually returned to his face. "The storm's starting to ease," he reported. "Should be clear by morning. We'll need to assess the damage then, see if we can still make it to the ranch in 3 days." "You've done enough for tonight," Victoria said firmly. "The other men can manage for a few hours while you rest." Samuel looked as though he might argue, but a massive yawn overtook him instead. Reluctantly, he nodded. "Just for an hour or two." Victoria exchanged a meaningful glance with Olivia, then moved to the far end of the wagon where her children slept. "I'll watch over Emma and James. You take care of our stubborn foreman." Olivia felt a blush warm her cheeks at Victoria's implication, but she didn't protest. Instead, she sat beside Samuel, taking the empty coffee cup from his hands. "Lie down before you fall down," she instructed gently. Too exhausted to argue, Samuel stretched out on a pallet near the wagon's entrance, his long frame barely fitting in the confined space. Within moments, his breathing deepened as sleep claimed him. Olivia watched him for a long while, noting how the hard lines of his face softened in repose. On impulse, she reached out to brush a lock of damp hair from his forehead. His skin was warm, too warm. With growing concern, she pressed her palm more firmly against his brow. "He's feverish," she whispered to Victoria, who had returned to check on them. Victoria frowned. "That's not good. He must have caught a chill working in this weather." Together, they managed to remove Samuel's sodden jacket and boots without waking him. Olivia covered him with an extra blanket, then settled beside him with a damp cloth to cool his fevered brow. Through the remainder of the night, she maintained her vigil, replacing the cloth when it warmed and occasionally coaxing him to drink water when he stirred. His sleep was fitful, punctuated by murmured words she couldn't quite make out, names, perhaps, or places from his past. As dawn broke, the storm had indeed passed, leaving a washed-out landscape in its wake. Richard returned to the wagon, his face lined with fatigue but relieved to find his family safe. "How is he?" he asked, nodding toward Samuel. "Fever," Olivia replied quietly. "He pushed himself too hard." Richard sighed heavily. "That's Hayes for you, never knows when to quit." He knelt beside his foreman, checking his temperature himself. "He can't ride today, we need to let him rest." "Will that delay our arrival?" Victoria asked. Richard shook his head. "The storm did that already." "The trail ahead is washed out in places. We'll need to find an alternate route, which means another day or two at least." By mid-morning, Samuel's fever had worsened. He drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes calling out in delirium. Olivia rarely left his side, even as the wagon train slowly resumed its journey. "You care for him," Victoria observed on the second day, as Olivia bathed Samuel's face with cool water. Olivia couldn't deny it. "Yes," she admitted softly, "I do." "He's a good man," Victoria said. "Richard trusts him completely, and my husband is not a man who trusts easily." "I hardly know him," Olivia protested weakly. Victoria smiled knowingly. Sometimes the heart knows what the mind hasn't figured out yet. That evening, as they made camp beside a small creek, Samuel's fever finally broke. Olivia was alone with him in the wagon, the Edwards having taken the children to stretch their legs after the day's travel. Samuel's eyes fluttered open, clarity replacing the glassy gaze of fever. "Olivia." He rasped, his voice dry from disuse. Relief flooded through her. "I'm here," she said, helping him sit up slightly to drink some water. He drank gratefully, then looked around in confusion. "How long was I out?" "2 days," she replied. "You had us worried." Samuel grimaced. "I don't get sick." Olivia couldn't help but laugh at his indignant tone. "Apparently you do, Mr. Hayes. Even the strongest men are not immune to illness." He managed a weak smile. "You stayed with me." It wasn't a question, but Olivia nodded anyway. "Someone had to make sure you didn't die on us before we reached Idaho." His hand found hers, surprisingly strong despite his weakened state. "Thank you." The simple touch sent warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the close confines of the wagon. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, recognition, perhaps, of feelings that had been growing since that night in Tonopah Junction. "Samuel, she began, but the wagon flap opened, and Emma Edwards burst in. "Mama says dinner is ready." The girl announced, then stopped short at the sight of Samuel awake. "Mr. Hayes, you're better." Samuel released Olivia's hand as Emma bounded over to his pallet. "Not quite good as new yet, Miss Emma, but getting there. Papa will be so happy." "He's been ever so worried about you," Emma confided. "He says you're indispensable." "That's high praise indeed," Samuel replied, a smile tugging at his lips. He glanced at Olivia over the child's head, a question in his eyes. Olivia rose, smoothing her skirts. "I'll fetch you some dinner, Samuel. You need to eat to regain your strength." As she left the wagon, she pressed a hand to her racing heart. The moment that had passed between them had felt significant, a threshold crossed, though neither of them had put it into words. For the first time since Thomas's death, Olivia allowed herself to truly contemplate a future that included love again. The final days of the journey passed quickly. Samuel, though still weak, insisted on resuming his duties, though Richard limited him to supervising rather than physical labor. The landscape changed as they traveled further into Idaho territory, becoming more lush and green than the arid Nevada lands they'd left behind. Finally, on a crisp autumn morning, Richard announced that they had reached their destination. As the wagon crested a hill, Olivia gasped at the view that spread before them, a wide valley with a river winding through it, surrounded by rolling hills and distant mountains. In the center of the valley stood the framework of a large house, with several outbuildings already completed. "Welcome to your new home," Victoria said, squeezing Olivia's hand excitedly. As they approached, workers emerged from the various structures, carpenters, masons, and ranch hands who had been sent ahead to prepare the property. Richard had clearly spared no expense in establishing his new ranch. The wagons came to a stop in front of the main house, which, though incomplete, already showed signs of becoming an impressive residence. Victoria immediately began directing the unloading of their belongings, while Richard conferred with the construction foreman about the progress made in their absence. Samuel helped Olivia down from the wagon, his hand lingering on hers a moment longer than necessary. "What do you think?" he asked, gesturing toward the sprawling property. "It's beautiful," Olivia replied honestly. "I never imagined something so grand." "Edwards aims to build the largest cattle operation in Idaho," Samuel explained. "He's already purchased the grazing rights to most of the surrounding land." A worker approached, interrupting their conversation. "Mr. Hayes, boss wants you to see to the cattle, says they need to be counted and sorted before sundown." Samuel nodded, his expression shifting back to the professional mask he wore as foreman. "I'll be right there." He turned back to Olivia. "Duty calls. Will I see you at supper?" "I'll be cooking it," she reminded him with a smile. The weeks that followed were busy for everyone as they settled into life on the ranch. The main house was completed just before the first snowfall. and Olivia and Lily moved into their adjacent quarters, a cozy two-room apartment that connected to the main house through the kitchen. As promised, Olivia took charge of the cooking while also caring for Lily, who was now crawling and becoming more active by the day. Samuel's duties kept him occupied from dawn till dusk most days. As winter deepened, the cattle required constant attention to ensure they survived the harsh Idaho weather. Despite his busy schedule, he made time each evening to visit Olivia and Lily, often bringing small gifts, a wooden toy he'd carved for the baby, wildflowers he'd found on the range, or once, memorably, a book of poetry he'd purchased on a supply run to Boys City. "I remembered you saying you missed having books to read," he explained somewhat shyly when she unwrapped the volume. Olivia was deeply touched by his thoughtfulness. "It's perfect, Samuel, thank you." Their relationship had grown closer since their arrival at the ranch, though neither had put their feelings into words. Victoria noticed, of course, and made no secret of her approval. "He's different when he's around you," she remarked one afternoon as they prepared dinner together. "Softer somehow, more at peace," Olivia blushed. "We're just friends." Victoria arched an eyebrow. "Friends don't look at each other the way you two do." Christmas approached, bringing with it preparations for the ranch's first holiday celebration. Victoria was determined to make it a festive occasion, despite their relative isolation. She organized the decoration of the main house with evergreen boughs and red ribbons, while Olivia baked tirelessly cookies, pies, and a massive fruitcake that had been Thomas's favorite. The thought of her late husband brought a momentary pang of sadness. This would be her first Christmas without him, but also Lily's first Christmas altogether. The baby was now 9 months old and thriving in their new home. On Christmas Eve, a snowstorm blew in, confining everyone to the main house. The ranch hands gathered in the bunkhouse with their own celebration, while the Edwards family, Olivia, Lily, and Samuel congregated in the main house's spacious parlor. A fire roared in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the festively decorated room. Richard Edwards, in a rare moment of relaxation, played the fiddle while Victoria accompanied him on the small piano that had been shipped at great expense from San Francisco. Emma and James taught Lily to clap along to the music, delighting in the baby's giggles. Olivia watched the scene with a heart full of gratitude. 6 months ago, she had lost everything in a devastating fire. Now, she found herself surrounded by people who had become like family, in a home that was safe and secure. Her eyes met Samuel's across the room, and the intensity of his gaze sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the winter chill outside. He stood and made his way over to where she sat, taking the empty chair beside her. "Happy?" he asked quietly. Olivia nodded. "More than I thought possible again." Samuel seemed to gather his courage before speaking again. "Olivia, I've been meaning to talk to you about something." Her heart quickened. "Yes." Before he could continue, however, there was a commotion at the front door. One of the ranch hands burst in, snow coating his hat and shoulders. "Fire!" he shouted. "Fire in the barn!" The happy atmosphere shattered instantly. Richard was on his feet, reaching for his coat. "How bad?" "Just starting, boss. Lightning strike, I reckon. We've got the men forming a bucket line, but with this wind," Samuel was already pulling on his coat. "Get blankets, wet them if you can," he ordered. "And keep the cattle away from the structure." Olivia felt a surge of fear as memories of the fire in Tonopah Junction flooded back. "Samuel," she called, catching his arm as he headed for the door. "Be careful." He looked down at her, understanding in his eyes. "I will stay here with Lily." The men rushed out into the storm, leaving Victoria, Olivia, and the children in the parlor. Through the windows, they could see the orange glow of flames against the snowy night, growing brighter by the minute despite the howling blizzard. "Should we prepare for evacuation?" Olivia asked Victoria, already mentally cataloging what she would need for Lily if they had to flee into the storm. Victoria shook her head. "The main house is too far from the barn to be in danger, especially with all this snow, but the barn itself." She trailed off, worry creasing her brow. All our winter feed is stored there. And the horses. Hours passed in tense waiting. The children eventually fell asleep on the parlor sofa, but Olivia and Victoria maintained their vigil by the window, watching as men moved like shadows against the fiery backdrop. Finally, near midnight, the door opened and Richard and Samuel entered, both men exhausted and smoke-stained. Victoria rushed to her husband. "The barn. Total loss," Richard replied grimly. "But we saved most of the horses and some of the feed. It could have been worse." Samuel slumped into a chair, coughing from smoke inhalation. Olivia immediately fetched him water, which he drank gratefully. "Are you hurt?" she asked, searching his face for signs of injury. He shook his head. "Just tired and smoky." He attempted a smile. "Not exactly how I plan to spend Christmas Eve. As long as everyone is safe," Olivia said fervently. "Buildings can be rebuilt." Richard, who had been conferring quietly with Victoria, approached them. "Hayes, we'll need to ride to Boise City as soon as the storm clears." "We'll have to purchase more feed to get the cattle through winter," Samuel nodded. "First light if the snow lets up." "Take the day to rest," Richard insisted. "It's Christmas, after all. The cattle won't starve in a day." After Richard and Victoria had taken their sleepy children upstairs, Olivia and Samuel remained in the parlor, alone except for Lily, who slept peacefully in her cradle. "You were going to tell me something," Olivia reminded him gently. "Before the fire." Samuel looked into the dying embers of the hearth fire, his expression thoughtful. "It can wait. You should get some rest." Olivia laid her hand on his. "Samuel, please. After everything that's happened tonight, I think we both know that tomorrow isn't guaranteed. Say what's in your heart." He turned his hand over to clasp hers, his calloused fingers entwining with her smaller ones. "I love you, Olivia," he said simply. "I think I've loved you since that night in Tonopah Junction when I saw you standing there in the firelight, desperate to save your child." Olivia's breath caught in her throat. Though she had begun to hope, to suspect that his feelings matched her own, hearing the words spoken aloud filled her with both joy and trepidation. "It hasn't even been a year since Thomas died," she whispered. "Is it wrong to feel this way so soon?" Samuel's gaze was steady, understanding. "Only you can answer that, but I know this life is precious and all too brief. The war taught me that. Tonight's fire reminded us both. We can't always choose when love finds us, only whether we're brave enough to embrace it." Tears welled in Olivia's eyes as the truth of his words resonated within her. Thomas had been her first love, the father of her child. Nothing could diminish what they had shared. But he was gone, and she was still here, still living, still capable of loving. "I love you too," she admitted, her voice trembling but sure. "I've been afraid to say it, afraid to trust these feelings. But I do love you, Samuel Hayes." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after the longest night. He leaned forward, cupping her cheek with his hand. "May I kiss you, Olivia Anderson?" "Yes," she breathed, closing the distance between them. His lips met hers with gentle reverence, a promise of devotion that made her heart soar. When they parted, Olivia felt as though something broken inside her had finally begun to heal. "What happens now?" she asked, still cradled in the circle of his arms. "Now," Samuel replied, pressing his forehead to hers, "we build a future together if you'll have me. I don't have much to offer yet, but Richard has promised me a parcel of land as payment for my services. It's good land, enough to start a small ranch of our own someday. I don't need riches, Samuel, just a home for Lily and someone to share it with who will love her as his own." Samuel glanced at the sleeping baby. "I already do," he said softly. "She's part of you, how could I not love her?" Snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the world in pristine white, while inside, by the dying embers of the Christmas Eve fire, two hearts found their way to each other across the wilderness of grief and loss. Spring came to the Idaho Valley in a riot of wildflowers and new growth. The Edwards Ranch thrived despite the setback of the winter barn fire, with a new, larger structure rising from the ashes of the old one. Cattle grazed contentedly on the lush pastureland, and preparations were underway for the spring calving season. Olivia stood on the porch of the small cabin that she, Samuel, and Lily now called home. It was a modest dwelling compared to the Edwards' main house, but it was theirs built by Samuel's own hands on the parcel of land Richard had deeded to him as promised. Lily, now 15 months old, toddled around the yard, chasing a butterfly with squeals of delight. Her dark curls bounced with each unsteady step, and her laughter was the sweetest music Olivia had ever heard. "She's getting faster," Samuel remarked, coming up behind Olivia and slipping his arms around her waist. "Soon we won't be able to keep up with her." Olivia leaned back against his solid warmth. "She's fearless, just like her father." "Thomas, no," Olivia said, turning in his arms to face him. You're her father now in every way that matters." Samuel's eyes softened with emotion. In the month since their Christmas Eve declarations, their love had only deepened. They had married in a simple ceremony in February with the Edwards family and the ranch hands as witnesses. Samuel had formally adopted Lily, giving her his name and his unconditional love. "Speaking of fathers," Olivia said, a smile playing at her lips, "how do you feel about becoming one again?" Samuel's brow furrowed in confusion for a moment before understanding dawned. "Are you saying?" Olivia nodded, happiness bubbling up within her. The baby should arrive around Christmas. With a whoop of joy, Samuel lifted her off her feet, spinning her in a circle before setting her gently back down. "A Christmas baby," he marveled, placing a reverent hand on her still flat stomach. "Best gift I could ever receive." As they stood together, watching Lily play in the sunshine of their own land, Olivia reflected on the journey that had brought them here. A journey that had begun in fire and tragedy when a stranger had risked everything to save her child. "Fire took the roof above her cradle," she murmured, recalling that terrible night in Tonopah Junction. Samuel kissed her forehead tenderly, "and gave us each other in return." Later that evening, as Olivia wrote in the journal Samuel had given her now nearly full with the story of their life together, she penned words that summed up her heart's journey. "From the ashes of what was, love built what could be. Not a replacement for what was lost, but a new creation entirely, beautiful in its own right. Thomas will always have his place in my heart as Lily's first father and my first love. But my heart has proven larger than I knew, with room for new love to grow alongside cherished memories. Samuel asks nothing of me but that I live fully in the present while honoring the past that shaped me. In his arms I have found not just safety, but the courage to love again deeply, completely, without reservation. And in that love, Lily has found a father who cherishes her as his own, who will teach her to ride and rope and face the world without fear. Tomorrow, Samuel begins breaking ground for an addition to our cabin, a room for the new baby, and perhaps others to follow. Our family grows, our roots deepen in this Idaho soil, so far from where my journey began. Yet I know with absolute certainty that this is where I am meant to be. The fire that once destroyed everything I held dear ultimately led me to everything I never knew I wanted. Life, it seems, has a wisdom beyond our understanding. We need only the courage to follow where it leads." Closing her journal, Olivia went to the window where she could see Samuel on the porch, Lily sleeping against his chest as he rocked in the chair he had crafted for their home. The setting sun gilded them both in golden light, father and daughter, bound not by blood, but by a love that had been forged in fire and tested by time. She placed a hand on her stomach, where their second child grew a new life, a new beginning. From Tonopah Junction to this peaceful valley, their path had been unexpected but perfect in its way. "Thank you," she whispered to the memory of that terrible night, now transformed into the foundation of her happiness. For without that loss, she would never have found this love a love strong enough to rise from ashes and build a future bright with promise. And as darkness fell over their little homestead, lights glowed warm in the windows, keeping the night at bay not just with their physical brightness, but with the greater light of love and family that no shadow could ever extinguish.